was February 1983, and in the quiet town of Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, a strange darkness settled over the heart of a young man. His name was Don Decker, and over the course of a single week, he would become the center of one of the most baffling supernatural cases in American history. Some would call him cursed. Others would say he was a conduit, a vessel for something ancient and evil. But before the rain fell inside the ceilings, before the cold drops soaked police uniforms and defied the laws of nature, there was just a boy who grew up surrounded not by love, but by torment. But before we get into today's disturbing case, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts down in the comments. This is the haunting story of Don Decker, the Rain Boy. Don Decker was born in 1962 in Stroudsburg, a small town tucked within the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. Not much is publicly known about his exact family lineage, but what is known, what Don would later confess, was that his childhood was nothing short of a nightmare. Behind closed doors, Don endured years of unspeakable abuse at the hands of his grandfather. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, and worse. For most of his early years, Don kept this pain hidden, buried beneath a mask of silence. Those who knew him said he was quiet, withdrawn, a loner. He wasn't the type to get into trouble, but he also wasn't the type to open up. He carried his trauma like a ghost on his back. No therapy, no intervention, no justice, just pain and a growing darkness. As he grew older, Don's life did not improve. He struggled with his mental health, often plagued by depression and episodes of dissociation. Don didn't finish school. He struggled to hold jobs. He drifted through his late teens, getting into petty crime, mostly theft and minor offenses. Nothing violent, nothing out of control. He wasn't violent, but he was desperate, angry, numb, and it was enough to land him in county jail by the time he was 21 for burglary. He was sentenced to 4 to 12 months at the Monroe County Correctional Facility. At the time, Don was serving a short stretch enough to be punished, not forgotten. He wasn't a career criminal. He was quiet. Other inmates barely noticed him. He kept to himself, reading, sitting still for long periods. But then came the call. On February 24th, 1983, Don's grandfather had died. February 24th, 1983, the week everything changed. It was the day Don's grandfather died. Don was granted a furlough, a rare, temporary release to attend the funeral. This was no small matter. You don't let just anyone out of jail. But Don had no history of violence, and the prison saw this as an act of compassion. They assigned a schedule. Don would be picked up, attend the funeral, and stay the night with family friends Bob and Jeannie Kiefer before returning to jail the next day. But what should have been a day of closure turned into something else entirely. At the funeral, Don stood quietly. He watched people cry, people who had no idea what this man had done to him. He listened to the priest call his grandfather a good man, a pillar of the community. Don clenched his fists. He later said that standing there, surrounded by mourners, felt like betrayal. He wanted to scream the truth. Instead, he said nothing, but something inside him began to turn. Don stayed with Bob and Jeannie Kiefer at their modest home in nearby Stroudsburg. After the funeral, Don felt sick and heavy. He excused himself and went to the upstairs bathroom. It was there, sitting alone in silence, Don said something strange happened. He claimed to feel an overwhelming chill, an icy presence that froze the air around him, and then he slipped into what he called a trance. He later said he saw the face of his deceased grandfather, sneering at him, mocking him. That rage, that old helplessness surged inside him, and with it came the rain. Actual water, cold, wet, falling, began to drip from the ceilings, but it wasn't raining outside. The house had no plumbing leaks, and the strangest part that the water didn't fall straight down. It moved sideways, diagonally, as if the laws of gravity had stopped applying. Don came downstairs, pale, glassy-eyed. He didn't speak. He simply sat in a chair, and the rain followed him. Bob and Jeannie were terrified. They had no idea what was going on. They even called the landlord, Ron Van Wy, who lived nearby. When Ron walked in, he too saw the rain coming from nowhere. He was dumbfounded. His home had never had issues. And then in that moment it stopped, instantly. like someone had shut off a faucet in the sky. Now thoroughly shaken, the Kiefers called the police. Officers John Bougen and Richard Wolbert responded, and what they witnessed would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Water was dripping from the walls, not in small leaks, but in a slow, steady downpour. The officers stood in the living room, watching in disbelief as droplets defied gravity, hovering and darting sideways across the air. Wolbert later said, "We were talking to Ron, and all of a sudden water drops started to form on the walls and ceiling, and they came out horizontally." Don, meanwhile, sat motionless in a chair, staring forward, entranced. The officers left shaken, and when they returned to the station and reported what they saw, they were met with disbelief. The next day, a lieutenant came back to the house to investigate for himself, and sure enough, the rain began again, right in front of him. They had no answers. They were trained officers, realists, men of law and logic, but what they witnessed defied every rule in the book. Back at the house, dawn seemed to grow darker. Objects began flying off walls, crosses would swing wildly. One account said that Don levitated off the ground just for a moment, and when he returned to the floor, deep scratches were found running down his neck and arms. It became clear to everyone. The rain only appeared when Don was there. Don returned to jail the next day, and everyone thought maybe it was over, but it wasn't. The guards who let Don back in noticed something odd. The temperature around him was icy cold, even though the cell was heated. Then came the smell, rotting meat, sulfur, and the moment he was locked in his cell, the rain started again, inside the cell, from the concrete walls, from the ceiling. The guards were stunned. The warden was furious. They called maintenance, but nothing was leaking. No pipes were nearby. A priest was even brought in and attempted an exorcism. After spending 10 minutes with Don, he asked for holy water. Don began convulsing. Growling sounds came from his mouth. A violent wind indoors swept papers off desks. The priest began to pray, and for a moment, everything stopped. The rain ended. Don returned to his senses. He wept. The energy seemed to lift. Don, now out of the trance, broke down. He said he never meant for any of it to happen. He didn't understand it. He wasn't faking it. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He claimed that something took over him, something evil, something tied to his grandfather's death, a final revenge, perhaps, from beyond the grave. Some guards believed Don was possessed. Others thought he was cursed. Either way, they wanted him out. After that terrifying week in 1983, the phenomenon never returned. The rain stopped for good. Don served the rest of his time quietly and was released. He didn't talk about the incident for years. When Unsolved Mysteries covered the case in the early 1990s, Don appeared briefly calm, composed. He said he never wanted attention, that it wasn't a hoax, that something truly dark had passed through him. Don later worked maintenance jobs, lived a modest life. He didn't become famous, he never married, and had no known children. He didn't cash in on the story. In fact, he mostly vanished from public life. He mostly lived a quiet and stayed out of trouble. His mental health was never fully discussed publicly, but many have speculated that he suffered from PTSD, dissociation, or perhaps even deeper psychological fractures stemming from his abuse. Yet none of that fully explained what others witnessed. The police officers never recanted their stories. The landlord, the family, even jail officials, all of them stood by what they saw. This wasn't one man's delusion. It was witnessed by many. Was it poltergeist activity? A psychic manifestation of trauma? Demonic possession? Or something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to hear what you believe. Don Decker died on September 4th, 2012, at the age of 50. His death was quiet, no headlines, no national news, just an obituary for a man with a strange legacy known not for who he was, but for what happened to him or through him. He left behind no children, no known romantic partner. He had friends, co-workers, people who said he was kind, hardworking, that he never sought attention, that he never asked to be known as the Rain Boy. And maybe that's the most haunting part, that sometimes the people carrying the darkest storms never ask for the thunder. They just try to survive it. In the end, whether you believe Don Decker was possessed, traumatized, or simply misunderstood his story, remains one of the most compelling supernatural mysteries of the 20th century. because for 1 week in 1983, the rain didn't just fall, it followed. Sleep well.